Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Kellam, and welcoming you to this week's edition of Encounter. My co-host, Rachel Helgeson, is here. She's the pastor of the Northminster Presbyterian Church, and I'm the parish associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. Our guest today is a living legend, officially. And I know that probably half embarrasses you, Catherine, but at the same time, that's something to be proud of.
Better than dead legend, I guess.
Yeah. Our guest today was named in the year 2000 a living legend by the Library of Congress. Between 1975 and 1980, she had 4 books that brought a total of 2 Newbery Awards and 2 National Book Awards. And we could go on. You can Google Catherine Paterson, Bridge to Terabithia, The Great Gilly Hopkins, Jacob Have I Loved, and a number, well, how many? Maybe 45 books, Catherine?
Well, 40-something that have my name on it, I think.
40-something.
I finally counted. There were 43 that had my name on them.
Okay. So, you know, the internet's never up to date, but I just wanted to show you that I had done my research. And Rachel has read 1 or 2. Rachel, you've read Catherine's books to your children, and you grew up with them. Probably you're that young.
Yeah, I was telling Jeff earlier, I didn't realize that you had written The Tale of the Mandarin Duck. And it was a book that my sisters and I'm the oldest of 3 sisters, and we read that book over and over and over again as children. And I asked my mom recently if she still had that book, and she was like, no, you all wore it out. I think she had to buy it like 2 or 3 different times because that's how many times we had read it. But I was actually at the library with my kids, and I was getting books out, and then I found this one, The Angel and the Donkey, and I looked at it and I was like, Catherine Paterson wrote this book too? I mean, it was like a surprise to me. And then I read the book, and this is like the best telling of Balaam and the donkey, the, retelling of it. Also, it's hilarious because Balaam gets, here's the donkey, like, you silly head. I've been trying to protect you. The angel's like, you're ridiculous, Balaam, like your donkey's been with you this whole time. But then you go on to the end of this book, Catherine, and there's like a full exegesis of the scripture passage. It's better than some of my commentaries that are behind your thing. So thanks for that.
It was great fun to do because it was this Russian illustrator that wanted to illustrate something I'd written. And so I thought, and he wanted to do something biblical, actually. So I thought, and he wanted to do an angel. So there were several things that he wanted. And I thought, Balaam's ass is about the best Old Testament story with an angel in it, and it's funny. The donkey's smarter than anybody else in the story, and I'm one of these people who thinks very often animals are smarter than we are. I have a dog that outwits me all the time, and so I loved writing it. And then I thought, while I'm at it, I might as well just tell people about the various layers in the Old Testament, because most people don't know this unless they go to seminary. I certainly didn't. And I think it's fascinating to see how the Bible was put together.
What I find interesting about that story is that the idea for the story, we often wonder where an author gets the ideas, or you're driving down the street and something happens and you think, oh, that would key something, and you begin thinking about it for a while. So this book came out of the illustrator's desire.
Right.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So Rachel and I talked about sharing the books that we've especially enjoyed, and the first thing, of course, when we started talking about this was the Christmas season. And I remember, Catherine, we would read A Stubborn Sweetness, Angels and Other Strangers, which goes back many years. And I guess your husband, John, was a pastor in Virginia at that time?
No, he was in Maryland when I started writing the stories, and then he moved to Virginia.
Yeah. And then A Midnight Clear is one of the more recent ones. And we would read these on Christmas Eve. We had a tradition when our children were young and when our grandchildren were young.
I've been at it a long time, Jeff.
Well, so have I. So, now that the family's grown older and some of them have moved away, we don't have that tradition anymore, but we would read those stories to one another. And Catherine, some of your stories come out of your life experience, and you were born in China of missionary parents. And Rachel, you had a question about you were curious about that.
Yeah. So I know that you were born from missionary and you lived missionary life for a period of time, but also your spouse was a pastor, and Jeff informed me too that you have a background when you went to Union of Virginia in Christian education. And so it just was interesting to me, and I was kind of wondering how your life intertwined with this sort of theological strain within your personal life, but also in your professional life, how that affected your writing. Because I know for a fact, like I was reading about how you came to write Bridge Over Terabitha was a response to one of your sons losing a friend and creating a story out of that. So I just wondered, like, is it Preacher's Boy? If that was another one where, being a PK was sort of in the back of your mind at some level.
Well, of course. I mean, you write out of yourself. That's your best experience. And I often say, because I think people get writers' lives and their books confused, and they think, well, that everything that happens in your books is some experience you've had. And that's not necessarily so at all. But the feelings in the books are always my experience, because I don't know anybody else's feelings well enough to write about them. You can guess somebody else's feelings, but you can't really know them unless you're reading them in a book, and then you can overhear their souls, which is why fiction is so wonderful, because it allows you to get in absolutely inside another mind and soul. I think C.S. Lewis said something like the book cannot be what the writer is not. And so it always is interesting to me. In fact, not long ago, I was at a conference, and I stopped to see a friend of mine, Kwame Alexander, at the Harper booth. And we chatted for a while, and as I walked away, an editor came chasing after me, and she said, "Catherine, if you ever write anything with a spiritual theme, we would love to publish it." And I thought, oh, if you ever write a faith-based book, we would love to publish it. And I thought, I can't write any other kind. I'm a faith-based person. What have I been doing for all these years? That other Christians don't recognize that. And most of my banning and criticism has come from fellow Christians.
Right, because Jacob have I loved, Jeff and I were talking about that too, right on the cover of the book, it says Jacob have I loved on the front. And if you turn the book on the back, it says, and Esau have I hated. And I was like, well, that's right out of scripture. So it's really interesting.
Well, that's on the back of the paperback. I think it wasn't on the back of the original hardback. And it was interesting to me after that book was published, how many people couldn't figure out why I had named it Jacob Found Love, since there was no character named Jacob in the book. And one person, and he was a pastor, said immediately, but Esau have I hated. And of course, that passage is so troubling that was one reason I needed to write the book, for all the Esau's in the world who think that the sibling has been chosen and they have been despised. And I think, you look at the Bible, there are more sibling rivalries than they are problems between father and child or mother and child. I just began to realize how many people are crippled by feeling that mom always loved him best, or if my sister hadn't done so and so when I was a child, my whole life would have been different. And I think, well, do you want to spend your whole life crippled by childhood jealousy? And so I thought, well, I'm going to write a book for the Esau's. And I came across this wonderful thing that's in the Midrash, I think, that the Messiah will not come until the tears of Esau cease.
Wow.
And I thought, what a wonderful statement. And I think it's true that the kingdom of God doesn't come until the sorrows of the oppressed and the forgotten are healed.
Yeah.
That's so timely too, honestly.
The Tears of Esau, that sounds like a book title to me.
It doesn't. I mean, it's just a wonderful title. But I think I already wrote that book, so I can't do it again.
Tell me about the most recent book. What's the most recent book that you've written and is out there in the market now?
Well, that's Bertie's Bargain.
Yeah.
Which is another deep theological struggle for a 10-year-old, or not. Well, I guess she's 9 when the book begins.
Right. But she's suffered, she's troubled, and she's wondering kind of where God is.
Yeah. Well, I was being interviewed by a local radio station, and terrific. He was really a terrific interviewer, and he said, "Can't you give the kid a break?" I said, "Rick, if you have read my books, you'll know I never give my kids a break. When they're dealing with me, they're all in deep trouble."
Right.
You know what, though? There's something to say to that, too. Like, my daughter is 7 and my son is 4, and they ask some pretty deep questions. And I think a lot of times people discount kids for having to struggle with the struggles in the world and what they see and what wisdom they have. Like, my daughter has challenged me on questions that sometimes I don't even realize she's paying attention to, Yeah. Well, and which is, I think sometimes we discount kids and think, well, they're just young, they don't see it or they don't understand. But sometimes they just want to be acknowledged that they're experiencing hard things too. So I think that's what reaches into your writing, is that you're not discounting the kids. You're accepting them and their troubles and their hardship, and how are they working through that, and what does that look like? That's what I think makes it real, instead of just letting them off the hook and making it sort of like a Disney film, so yeah. No shade towards Disney, but
I think, well, people ask me why I don't write for adults, and I say because I don't want to write about adultery in academia. I want to write about the really important questions of life, and that's the questions that children ask, and that we try to brush under the rug because, of course, they're too young to understand, and then they have to carry that burden alone. And I love the idea that, children come to me and say, how do you know how we feel? Because they look at me and I'm an old lady, because I was a child and I know how I felt. And I don't have a wonderful memory for details. Just ask my sisters, they'll correct my memory for details all the time. But I think I do have a good emotional memory. And I know that 9-year-old child I carry around inside myself.
Yeah, we don't forget those childhood feelings. We can forget incidents, perhaps, or forget part of our history. But man, I remember how I felt in 9th grade. I remember how I felt in 7th grade.
Yeah.
Today is Catherine Paterson, and Rachel Helgeson is our co-host. I'm Jeff Kellam, and you're watching Encounter. Catherine, saw on the internet recently a list of books that have been banned. You had a book banned once, did you not, by someone?
I've had book banned rather frequently over the years. Just the books have gotten more bannable lately. So I haven't had any problems just recently, but for a while I was one of the top 10. And people said, aren't you proud? And I said, no, because every time a book is banned or challenged, it means that some teacher or librarian is in trouble because of me.
Yeah.
And I can't, and I do whatever I can to help in those situations. Sometimes the thing to help is to stay out of it. But so I always ask, is there anything I can do? But if a book has any power at all, it has the power to offend. And I don't want to write a book that has no power.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's the risk you take.
Yeah. Rachel, I got a list of questions here, but I don't want to take over the program.
So Catherine, I know that your life has been interesting and pulled through, but I also am curious, how did you get into just starting to write children's books? I mean, you talked about how your life is part of it, not in the sense of like being a reflection of your books and the emotion being part of it, but how did you just to say, you know what, I'm going to start sending some books today, and I'm going to just be prolific and keep writing and writing and writing.
When I was at what was then called the Assembly's Training School for Lay Workers in Richmond, Virginia, one of my professors was Dr. Sarah Little. And Sarah Little stopped me in the hall one day during exam time, and she said, Catherine, have you ever thought about being a writer? Well, I've been a reader since I was about 3 years old. I majored in English literature. I know what great writing is. And I said, no. I wouldn't want to add another mediocre writer to the world. And she said, well, maybe that's what God is calling you to be. And I didn't think God needed any more mediocre writers, but of course, what she was really saying was, if you don't dare to fail, if you don't dare to be mediocre, which to me was worse than failing, you'll never be anything at all. So I went to Japan for 4 years, and I came back, and Sarah Little was still determined to turn me into a writer, and she got me a job writing curriculum for the Covenant Life curriculum, which I wrote a book on the Christian faith for 5th and 6th graders. And by the time I'd finished that, I had 3 toddlers. By the time it was published, I had 2 toddlers, an infant, and we were trying to adopt another child. So I thought, well, I'm not going to go back to school teaching.
Yeah.
I'm going to try writing. And so between my curriculum publication and my first novel being published, I published exactly one short story that was published by a small Roman Catholic magazine that died the following month. And I sold one poem, which to another small Roman Catholic magazine that died before they published the poem. So that was my publishing career for 7 years. So when I became an overnight success, I thought, well, I mean, actually, 14 long night.
I told Rachel this story when we talked earlier about speaking of overnight successes. Joan and I were privileged to be in the state house in Vermont when you received the let's see, I'm looking for it here. I wrote it down. Oh yeah, it's the Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts in 2001. Mm-hmm. And Catherine, I remember you were there on the stage, and there were some other dignitaries there, and then Governor Howard Dean came down the middle aisle and made a nice speech and talked about how his children had read your books, or he had read your books to his children and was very touched by them. And then he turned around and realized he had no idea who you were. He said, one of you must be Catherine Paterson.
Well, I said to him later, I worked on your campaign, Governor Dean. not a. He just never put me together with the book writer.
Well, I had to tell that story because I we have you are awarded, but if you pass someone on the street, they don't know about Newbery Awards. They don't know about National Book Awards.
Isn't that lovely, though?
Well,
unfortunately, Vermont is too small a state, so I do get recognized here.
Oh, okay.
So Vermont is like the Presbyterian world, is what you're basically saying.
So, you mentioned your 4 children. Did they ever see themselves in your stories? Did they ever say, "Mom, that's my story"?
Well, when I was writing Bridge to Terabithia, I was pretty secretive about a book while I was working on it, because I always wanted to be able to throw it out if it was no good. And so I would work I knew I couldn't work while I had to pay attention to family, because, a child would run out in the street or burn the house down, and I would be concentrating, because I do have kind of an awful way to concentrate when I'm working or reading. And so I would wait till I could work, and then I would write madly in the 5 or 10 minutes allotted to me in that crazy life I lived in those days. And then I would put the manuscript away in a drawer and pretend I wasn't doing anything. And one day, John Jr. came roaring to me, and he said, "That boy started out to be me, and now it's turned into David." He was furious. Because he was sure he was Jess Aarons until Leslie died. But yeah, they like to be in the books. And I know I dedicated Great Gilly Hopkins to Mary. And if you've read Great Gilly Hopkins, you know she is not a lovely, wonderful person. She's a pretty awful kid. And Mary came to me and she said, "I need to ask you a question." And I said, "What?" She said, "Who's my William Ernest?" Because she's the youngest. I said, "Mary, you don't think you're Gilly Hopkins, do you?" And she said, "Sure, but who's my William Ernest?" Now, Mary is the gentlest, sweetest child you'd ever want to know. nothing like Gilly Hopkins, but she wanted to be Gilly Hopkins. So
That reminds me that there are our viewers and listeners would want to know that the Great Gilly Hopkins was a most recent film, a feature film,
Mhm.
and also Bridge to Terabithia was also a feature film, and both of them are still available on DVD, and I suppose they can be streamed somewhere.
All sorts of streaming devices. Yep.
Yeah. So if you've read the books, you'll want to see them because they are true to the books, aren't they, Catherine? Because you have a family member.
pretty true. And I think it's probably disloyal of me to say it, but I like Gilly Hopkins better as an adaptation of the book. I think we had to fight Disney all the way on Bridge to Terabithia, and in the end, I think we won the war, but we lost a few battles along the way. But we had
We still love Disney. That's funny that I said Disney earlier. Oops.
well, we did a, and it was because David was just there fighting them all the time. And my dear friend Susan Cooper, whose wonderful book was totally unrecognizable when it came out as a film, she would email me and she'd say, "I need a David. I need a David." and David, because they didn't want a kid to die.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's an ending that is affective, and most parents who are reading it wind up being tearful if their children aren't. I have to close this program really quickly, but our guest today has been Catherine Paterson, the author of The Great Gilly Hopkins and Bridge to Terabithia and 41 other books. My co-host Rachel Helgeson of the Northminster Presbyterian Church. Catherine, thank you so much for letting us into your home. I feel like Murrow and see it now here.
Well, thank you very much. I should have gotten a jazzier background for you, but it was lovely to be with you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us. And
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. And Jeff, always.
Thank you. Appreciate it.